Hi, my name's Ellie. I'm a Master of Forestry student at Northern Arizona University. I asked several people, well, I posted online at several of my social media places if anybody had any questions about wilderness. What would they like to learn? I got numerous questions, so I decided I'd share it in a video and help you appreciate the concept of wilderness, both because it is amazing and it also has some issues like everything. I don't believe that we need to just focus on its wonder, although that is an amazing part of wilderness. But it has a full history, and as such, it should be respected and challenged. Okay, so one of the first questions that I got was, what makes it a wilderness area? Why is it different, and why is it protected? There are actually two types of wilderness. One is experiential, which is just that it feels like you're in wilderness, and that is completely self-defined. The other one is designated wilderness, capital W. That is a very specific, federally assigned by Congress designation. It came about in 1964 with the Wilderness Act. And I'm going to try and stick to my notes so that I don't constantly keep repeating myself. The designated wilderness, it has a boundary, it has rules and regulations, and it also has management mandates. It is managed for 5 specific characteristics. That is natural, undeveloped, untrammeled. That's a really big word in the wilderness world. It really means unhampered and unrestricted actions. Then it's also managed, one of the other 5 characteristics is the outstanding opportunities for solitude. And then the 5th one is other features of value, which could be cultural, endemic species, and stuff, things like that. There are 4 opportunity classes defined within a wilderness area, because one of the things that's really important to keep in mind throughout what I'll be talking about and everything in the wilderness world is the word gradation. That there's not like, here's wilderness and now you're in it, and you take 2 steps off and then you're not. That is the legal definition of it, but your experience of that is by no means that precise and contrasting. So the 4 opportunities of classes are pristine, primitive, semi-primitive, and transition. Pristine meaning where you would go into it, you would not hear any other sounds, you would not see other people, you would not see evidence of people, and you could very likely not even see any trails. Transition would be all the other end, where you see a lot of people, the trails might be quite wide, and you could be next door to, for example, the Kachina Peaks Wilderness here in Flagstaff. There is a ski run and a ski lift that runs right next to the boundary. So then another one was, what makes the wilderness area different from a forest, and are they really wilderness? Well, neither the experiential nor designated capital W are actually really wilderness, because they are affected by areas around them. One of the easiest things to think about right now would be climate change. That is going to impact the air quality, it is going to impact the drought, the temperature, the amount of precipitation, and those are impacts from humans. So the idea that there is untouched land is untrue. Equally, humans have been adapting and leaving their mark on the landscape since we were humans, so there is no such thing as completely wild, untouched area. However, there are many wilderness areas that are a hell of a lot more wild feeling than a manicured lawn. So again, gradations. It is important to note that the wilderness areas, designated ones, are designed to have their free will, so that they are not as controlled and manipulated as other lands. But again, that has a lot of meanings and concepts behind it. So maybe we'll get to that another day. But let me go back to, is it different from a forest? Yes, because a wilderness area is a complete ecosystem, and a forest can be. A forest is a group of trees. There's a wonderful ponderosa, and they, all the life forms that the trees support. Whereas wilderness areas, they can have trees, they can be above timberline where there are no trees, they can be in the plains, they have marshes, they don't, we could include swamps, but the difference between a marsh and a swamp is that a swamp has trees. And they have glaciers, so they are not all strictly forests. And not all forests are in designated wilderness areas. Now, let's see. Oh, a disproportionate number of wildernesses are in the West. And so what you often think of when you think of designated wilderness is these big, huge, dramatic mountains and incredible landscapes. But think about this, you have to start somewhere to get up to those high levels. So you often do go through forest, and they are spectacular on their own. They just don't have the same views from far away or from on top looking down. So a wilderness has a lot of different ecosystems that are represented throughout the entire National Wilderness Preservation System, NWPS. Okay, and that was created in 1964 with the Wilderness Act. Another question I got was they would be interested in the origin stories. And so every single wilderness has its own story. They each had some kind of history prior to becoming designated. And those histories before designation are starting to be included. Mostly they all involve indigenous land, and I think it's probably every single wilderness was originally indigenous land. I don't know where anywhere in the United States wasn't. So they have indigenous history, and then they have European history, and that time frame goes all the way up until the moment that they were designated. Some wilderness areas had timber extraction, logging, they could have had mining, some of them still have grazing permits, so they have a lot of past. Some of them were designated out of like a recreation area, and that recreation area was designated so that it wouldn't turn into a national park, so that there would be more use for that. But then within that area is a wilderness area. Wilderness designation, I mentioned earlier, they have rules and regulations, and the rules include nothing mechanical, nothing motorized, so no bicycles, no chainsaws, no drones are allowed to take off and land in a wilderness area. And yeah, so if you're a wilderness ranger or you're doing trail work, you have to use a crosscut. You cannot use a chainsaw. You cannot even carry the chainsaw into the wilderness area. You can't cross the border, the boundary. Okay, some of those wilderness areas were, when they became designated, they were already managed under the national parks or national forests. During the 1964 Wilderness Act, there were 54 areas designated. We now have 803 wilderness areas in the United States. That includes at least some, in Puerto Rico. They are managed by 4 different agencies. National Park Service, they have the highest acreage that they manage because of the largest national wilderness area is Wrangell St. Elias in Alaska, and it is 9.4 million acres, and that's a NPS, National Park System. And then the Forest Service has 448 wildernesses that it manages. That's the highest number by any of the agencies. BLM has 260, and then the the Fish and Wildlife Service has only 71, and those are all under the National Wildlife Refuge System. So I bring this up because the agency often has a reflection of why it became a wilderness area. So the National Wildlife for Refuges for refuges for the fish and animal, they're refugees areas. They are one of the reasons that they get designated is specifically for the fauna and flora of that area. Let's see, in the U.S. there are 111,696,927 acres of wilderness, which sounds really huge. It's about the size of California. However, half of that acreage is in the state of Alaska. So in the lower 48, only 2.7% of the United States landscape is designated wilderness, which is roughly the size of Minnesota. I already mentioned the largest one, that's Wrangell St. Elias at 9.4 million, and the smallest is a little island in Florida at 5.5 acres. That one is pretty unusual because there are 4 criteria that are required. Usually you have to have at least 3 or 4 of those for it to be designated a wilderness. One of those is size, and it's usually 5,000 acres as a minimum. But the other 3 are it needs to have natural conditions. This is language from the '64 Wilderness Act, which states man's work substantially needs to be unnoticed. It needs to have opportunities for solitude or primitive recreation, and as I've mentioned, there are gradations within that. Then there is if it is a unique area, and that could include rare plants or wildlife, ecological, geologic, or other features of scientific, educational, scenic, or historical value. And that kind of addresses the last question that I got, which was, are there unique plants and animals? So yes, there are endemic species often in many of the wilderness areas, and that could be one reason that it was designated as a wilderness area. Here in the Kachina Peaks Wilderness, we have the San Francisco Peaks groundsel, which is an aster. That's a little flower, and it is found only in that area in the wilderness. It's it's found only in our wilderness area here. And so to wrap it up, all wilderness areas have a past. They are managed for multiple use. There are actually 7 of them, which I'll just say a few of them. There's public, recreation, scientific, educational use, and indirect use, which you can think of as ecosystem services. A lot of our clean water originates in national forests, and so many of those, actually, the headwaters are found in wilderness areas. They are contentious because they have these aspects to their designation, their history, and the various ways that we try to manage them. But they do, at the very least, they provide a reference for what nature has been, what wild was, is, and can be. They do require care to remain as magnificent areas for us to be immersed in nature. So, as always, recreate responsibly, and a really good way to do that is, if you pack it in, including your teepee, you got to pack out that toilet paper. Thank you. Go enjoy the nature. This is your science update for the day.